Welcome back to our third and final session of today's webinar, Shaping the Future of Cybersecurity, as we discuss surviving social engineering and ransomware attacks. We have a packed evening session with two speakers coming out of Kudalski Security joining us this afternoon, as well as a representative from Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Response Team. But before we jump into the presentations, don't forget you can put your questions in the Q&A chat box just below, and we will get to those questions after the presentation. So the three presentations, we'll take the questions at the very end. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to Mr. Graham Payne Kudalski, who will take you through his presentation.
Graham Payne, Practice Leader, Strategy, Risk and Compliance at Kudalski Security. Mr. Payne has more than 30 years of IT audit, technology risk and security experience, and has worked in various industries, including banking, consumer products, financial services, healthcare and insurance. He has significant experience with information security-related regulations and standards, including SOX, GLBA, HIPAA, NIST CSF, PCI-DSS, FFIEC, SOC audits, and ISO 27001. He has held leadership positions and led teams in the design and implementation of information security programs for Fortune 500 companies. As a former IT risk and compliance leader, Mr. Payne developed and implemented information security programs to ensure the integrity and confidentiality of the organization's critical data. He provided leadership and guidance across the organization, working with cross-functional teams, including legal, compliance, and audit functions, to achieve compliance to GLBA, PCI DSS, and SOX. Mr. Payne has developed and presented business cases for investment in security and risk programs. He has regularly presented to senior leadership teams and boards of directors on risk and security. Mr. Payne has extensive experience of managing through a major data breach, including the initial response, public notification, and remediation. He has testified to Congress and regulators on the breach. Mr. Payne holds numerous information security certifications. He is a regular speaker on cybersecurity topics. He is the author of the book, The New Era of Cybersecurity Breaches, a case study and lessons learned, and writes articles on cybersecurity topics. Let us welcome Mr. Payne.
Thank you for that introduction. Just confirming you can see my slide. Very good. Okay, well thank you. Both Daryl Switzer and I are here from Kudalski Security, and very glad to join you today. We want to cover 4 topics here with you. So I'm going to cover the first 2, and then Daryl's going to talk about the items 3 and 4 here. So I'll talk a little bit about the ransomware and social engineering threats, and then talk about some of the preventative methods and techniques that will help build resilience against attack. And then Daryl will cover some of the more of the response and recovery components of dealing with and surviving ransomware and social engineering. So just to sort of set the scene a little bit, would like to just highlight that, you know, the global threat landscape continues to evolve and continues to change every day, really. But if just, you know, sort of at a very high level, I think, you know, we've certainly seen continued data breaches occurring. If you look back from when data breaches started to be recorded around 2005, there have been over 11 billion records disclosed through data breaches and over 10,000 publicly reported data breaches. and that's just covering the US. And a lot of the early breaches were really focused on capturing data and trying to resell it, things like social security numbers and payment credit card numbers, things like that. More recently, I think, we've seen the criminal groups move to other techniques like ransomware, where they can break into an organization and use ransomware to really leverage and extort payment. And there's been a significant growth in ransomware. We'll talk, and Daryl will talk a little bit about some of the trends there and later in the presentation. But we're also seeing significant actions by state-sponsored actors and activist groups in attacking industrial control systems and critical infrastructure. And that continues to be another big threat vector for organizations to deal with because of a lot of the inherent vulnerabilities that exist in those environments. And as they get more connected to the internet and the IoT environments continue to get deployed, as well as the ability to cause pretty significant disruption when you attack a colonial pipeline or a critical infrastructure element, for example, you can create significant downstream effects. So that's sort of at the macro level, but let's drill down a little bit on social engineering, since that's what our topic is today, and ransomware. So the term social engineering really is used to describe both physical and logical attacks that exploit the human factor. And as you can see, some of the data here from the Verizon data breach, social engineering is leveraged in the majority of data breaches that are occurring to help gain access to systems and or deploy malware. And phishing is common in about a third of the breaches. Now, what social engineering is really designed to do is to engage humans and just exploit their weaknesses, our inherent weaknesses, leveraging tactics such as trying to befriend an individual or impersonating a friend, targeting people's emotions. For example, during the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of phishing attempts that tried to spread information about COVID or try to seek people to click on links related to COVID. Maybe making some sort of urgent requests so that appeal to the human need to want to be able to be responsive when there's a sense of urgency. So that often, an example there would be where a CEO was being impersonated, and an email goes to someone in the payments department requesting an immediate payment, or just creating a great offer that you just can't avoid clicking on. So those are the types of techniques that we see in the social engineering. The idea is to grab the attention of the victim, get them to click on a link or go to a website and be able to then use that as a path to deploy malware or execute code. Now, ransomware leverages some of those techniques in social engineering and is really not a new threat. In fact, ransomware has been around since 1989, which was the first known ransomware attack, the PC Cyborg attack. But what's happened more recently has been the use of encrypted ransomware, and that really started to become common starting around 2013 with the propagation of CryptoLocker that leveraged Bitcoin to collect ransoms. Probably one of the most significant ransomware attacks that people are aware of is the WannaCry ransomware attack in 2017 that affected over 230,000 computers in over 150 countries. And the attackers there deployed the WannaCry variant, demanded $300 per computer, and gave the victims 7 days to make the payment. Otherwise, their encrypted files would be deleted. And what's changed really in the more recent time is really the emergence of ransomware as a service. So now we're seeing this very sophisticated business model emerge where you can purchase toolkits to attack and exploit networks, things like CryptoWall and CryptoLocker. We're seeing business models emerge where they're offering 24/7 support, allows you to do bundled offers, to kind of do user reviews on different providers, to just like kind of an Amazon review, and also the ability to again the ability to leverage cryptocurrencies. So really, the cryptocurrency, what's happened with cryptocurrencies has really helped facilitate the use of the ransomware as a service business model, but also obviously the collection of ransom payments as well. And we see that this is we think that ransomware will continue to grow in use. It's easy to execute. It's very friendly to the criminals and easy to facilitate. And the number of attacks are increasing. The payments they're demanding are also increasing. And as I said, it's easy to execute, despite efforts of law enforcement who have had some success, but not widespread success. So I think we'll continue to see an expansion. We will definitely see continued use of ransomware by criminal groups, and probably continue to see companies pay the ransoms, particularly when they're in a situation where it's either pay the ransom and bring their business back into operation, or not pay the ransom and basically threaten the end of their business, which again just perpetuates this whole growth of the ransomware business. So let's sort of walk through a ransomware attack just to see how it is actually executed. So I'm going to use the idea of the kill chain, which is a MITRE concept that we use a lot in our business. So we talk about the attack in sort of three phases: the pre-breach phase, the breach phase, and the post-breach phase. In the pre-breach phase, the first thing that the attackers are going to do is they're going to start gathering data about the target, and they're using a variety of techniques, including publicly available data and scans of the external environment. This might include searching the dark web for leaked credentials. And the intent here is really to build a profile of the organization to allow them to move to the next phase. In the next phase, the design and build, they now have sufficient information to be able to structure and build a document or a website that can really align with the business and the organization that they're going after. That malicious document can include embedded malware or links to websites that will contain malicious content, and it would be launched through a phishing email with the hope that the user will click on it and download the malware. Or they might exploit vulnerabilities that they've found through the reconnaissance phase. For example, they might find a remote RDP server, Windows RDP server that's exposed, and be able to log into that directly, or we use a SQL injection to gain access. So in the next phase, they will send out that phishing email, or use that exploit technique that they have to be able to deliver the malware and gain access. So now we move into the breach phase. In the breach phase, the malware is deployed, and now we start to execute or exploit vulnerabilities that exist on the internal network or in the target environment. Once a vulnerability is found and it proved that it can be exploited, then malware will be installed to be able to try and gain command and control of the network or systems. So now at that point, we've actually gained access to the system, we've deployed our malware, and we now have command and control. At that point, often the attacker now will sell or lease that information, that command and control system, to another party so that they can exploit the ransomware or deliver the ransomware payload. So so now we're in the post-breach phase. So now the command and control has been established. The attacker now has a path to send and receive commands through into the internal environment, and now they can start actioning on their objectives. And that might include gaining broader access across the network, so moving laterally across the network. That might mean gaining additional credentials or escalating the privileges they already have, or deploying the ransomware itself. The goal here really is to land, expand, and then extort. And typically they're going to go after a target like a domain controller, because once you have access to that, you basically have access to the network. And again, they're trying to exploit vulnerabilities that are existing on the network to be able to gain that foothold. And of course, their ultimate goal is to decrypt files, or sorry, to encrypt files and demand payment for those. So that's the ultimate goal of the ransomware attacker. The other thing we've seen more recently, particularly over the last year or so, is not only are they deploying the ransomware, they're also extracting or exfiltrating data out of your environment, and storing that somewhere else, so that they can use that as a what's called a double extortion. So they can basically say, you need the key to decrypt your files, but we also have your data, so we'll either ask for another payment for that, or we'll use that as leverage to get the ransomware payment made. And the ransomware itself is very quick to encrypt. In fact, a study was done by one vendor that showed that using different variants of ransomware, it takes about 42 minutes to encrypt 54 gigabytes, or about 100,000 files. The fastest time on one of the variants was 5 minutes. So 5 minutes to encrypt 54 gigabytes. So it tells you a little bit about the method that the attackers are using. Let's transition and talk. I want to talk a little bit about some of the preventative measures that organizations should have in place. And really, this is all about building resilience to attack. So how do you build resilience to attack? So our proposition is that you really have to take a systemic approach to cybersecurity. So it's really about building an ongoing program to address not only the ransomware and social engineering threats, but really all types of attacks on your environment. And this, the program really should start by understanding what your critical assets and data are, and then developing and implementing the appropriate protective and detective measures to secure those assets and data. The sorts of things that would include would be, for example, network segmentation, multi-factor authentication, regular and immutable backups. So regular backups, and then make sure that they're being backed up to immutable storage devices, so that when the ransomware is deployed, it's not going to overwrite those backups. Security awareness training, so helping to educate your users, making sure that they're aware of the threats that will be coming to them in terms of phishing or spear phishing, and then how they should react to those, what they should do if they see something suspicious, and then testing them through simulated phishing techniques. Endpoint protection, probably the number one recommendation we would make to most organizations is, if you don't have endpoint protection in your environment, that's the first thing you should do. Protect the endpoint, get some endpoint software deployed, and then have that monitored. Whether you're doing that internally or having a third party like a Kadowski security to do that monitoring, that's really critical. And then patching and vulnerability management. Now, that's because a lot of these techniques leverage existing vulnerabilities that are in the organization. So staying on top of your vulnerabilities, making sure you're patching, particularly all your critical and high vulnerabilities, is really important. It's also very important to have processes and technologies to detect potential incidents and respond to them and recover from them quickly. And as I said, having both the detection software deployed, endpoint protection, data leak prevention, DLP technologies, etc., as well as having an ability to monitor those on a 24/7 basis. But to do all that requires an holistic approach focused on people, process, and technology. So there is no technology that will solve this. There is no single technology. It's really a combination of all those things working together. And then also making sure that this is done in the context of your business. So making sure that you have, you understand what the risk tolerance and the risk appetite of your organization is. And then if the risk tolerance is very low, then obviously that requires more stringent control, as opposed to organizations where they may have more relaxed or a more general risk tolerance. So regulated industries such as banking, for example, generally have a very low risk tolerance, both because of regulatory pressures as well as just because of the business model. So just understanding that is an important factor of building your program. And then the last thing I'd say is that, building a cybersecurity program is a continuous process. So you're never done, right? It's a journey. It's never a destination. So it's a continuous process of assessing, planning, deploying, monitoring, reassessing, and continuing to enhance the program as changes in business occur, as changes in technology occur, and as changes in the threat landscape occurs. So a good place to start, if you haven't made a start, or if you want to see where you are in that kind of evolution, is to undertake an assessment and a benchmark of your program. So this is a lot of work we do, and myself and my team do, is we come in and we take a look at an organization's and cybersecurity program and really benchmark it to understand where they are compared to others in their industry, where their maturity is, where they need to go, what are the investments they need to make, what's the roadmap look like, where are the gaps, where are the risks, and then being able to use that to educate their leadership and their management and their boards to be able to make the appropriate investments based on their risk tolerance and their risk appetite. In addition to doing kind of a holistic enterprise assessment of your security program, we'd also recommend, particularly related to ransomware, a more focused assessment on the preventative, detective, and responsive processes you've got in place to address the ransomware threat. We've found this type of an assessment to be very helpful to organizations that particularly are being asked by their management teams, by their boards, about how would they react to a ransomware event? Are they prepared for it, and have they got all the appropriate protections in place to minimize the impact of a ransomware event? So we have a very specific tailored assessment where we look at the ransomware threat, and you could do this internally or you could use a third party to do it. But some of the things I would recommend you look at is things like that have you got all the right technologies in place to prevent and detect and respond to a ransomware attack. And there is some good guidance available, for example, from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US that talks about some of the controls and methods and mechanisms that you can use to protect yourself and detect and respond to a ransomware event. We also look at awareness and education and how people are informed and do they know their roles, as well as a very important aspect here is understanding the backup and recovery processes you have in place. As I said before, it's really important to have regular backups and immutable backups. So making sure that there's a good thorough backup and recovery capability in the event that a ransomware attack does actually occur. So that's the main points I wanted to cover here, and hopefully we'll take some questions on this later on. And now I'm going to pass over to Daryl.
Daryl Switzer, Director, U.S. Incident Response at Kudelski Security. As the leader of the Kudelski Security U.S. Threat Response Team, Mr. Switzer is charged with assisting our global portfolio of clients to prepare for and react to criminal attacks and data breaches. Mr. Switzer leverages 19+ years of hands-on incident response experience to lead teams of world-class experts working on some of today's most high-profile data breaches. Prior to joining Kudelski Security, he held senior positions with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Citibank, Fishnet Security, and BAE Systems. Let us welcome Mr. Switzer.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for spending a few minutes here today with us talking about ransomware and how to protect yourself. What I'm going to talk about first, talk about a little bit of trends. I have people working with me that are frankly pretty fatigued on working ransomware incidents. I receive probably anywhere from 3 to 5 calls a month with large-scale ransomware attacks. And so all these trends that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes and how to prepare, we're definitely seeing this in real life. Very interesting. Average ransomware payment is over $200,000. That's down quite a bit from the last quarter of 2021. I'll show a graph in a few minutes that really shows the explosion of ransomware during the pandemic. Everybody was working from home. The computers weren't necessarily at home protected as good as they were in corporate offices. And we just saw proliferation of ransomware, usually started through social engineering, through email campaigns and things of that nature. As you can see, Graham mentioned a little bit about the double extortion, and really every single client that is coming to me with ransomware is getting 2 different notifications. They get the first notification that they have ransomware on their systems, and then usually within a week or 2, they receive additional emails trying to extort and showing that the threat actor has gained access to some sensitive files. Usually they'll send some screen prints or something like that. We even see them to really leverage the double extortion. There's websites that you can go to where they will leak your company name and say that you're not interested in security, and they have your data and they start releasing it piece by piece. We're seeing this quite a bit. A big uptick in the use of AECs, the anonymity enhanced cryptocurrencies. The different governments, and there's a lot of people that are working together and collaborating, which has made Bitcoin payments and things like that not as safe as in the past for these criminal gangs. And so we're seeing them use a lot of these AECs recently. I mentioned, kind of the uptick. If you look at this chart that you see here, Coveware, they're one of the leading ransomware negotiating firms. And so I refer quite a few clients to them to when they're in a situation that they don't have backups and they can't restore, and they have to actually negotiate with criminal gangs. Coveware is one of those leading firms. They collect a lot of statistics like you see here. I would say my business really reflects this chart very closely. We've seen, like I said, huge uptick in 2020 and 2021. We saw a little drop in the beginning of this quarter 1 of 2022, but that's only, I think, because we had such an uptick at the end of 2021. Interesting enough, RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, is still one of the most attacked vectors. This has been going on since the 90s, and it still continues. What happens is clients expose terminal services to the internet. A user gets phished and gives away their username, gives away their credentials, and results in unfettered access for the threat actors. So RDP is still one of the biggest attacks, but you can see on this chart where the phishing is really starting to uptick. Everybody's getting a little smarter about RDP, but we're seeing a lot more phishing attacks. And like Graham mentioned, there's always the vulnerabilities. I would say it's one of the leading causes for most of the incidents, not just ransomware. It's just unpatched vulnerabilities in organizations. We mentioned the double extortion, and I've had personally a couple different clients, and I've read about a lot of other clients where once the threat actor shows you that they have proof of life, we call it, they have your data, maybe you decide to pay them, you have to have some kind of proof of the deletion. And I've seen screenshots before, and I've seen deletion logs and that sort of thing. Normally, the threat actor or the criminal gang will just say, yes, we deleted your data. And that's all the proof that they'll give you. I thought it rather interesting that almost 2% of the people are willing to get on a live screen share with a person who attacked their network so that they can watch them delete their files. I always, I think most of us probably have a pretty hard time with this. You're really depending on a criminal gang to keep their word. And so we have seen cases where, and I've read about several cases where the threat actor has claimed to delete the data, but then they come back 6 months, a year later, trying to extort more money and saying they didn't delete all the data. We see that quite a bit. Again, this is from Coveware, but it very much mimics what we're seeing right now. I would say I see Conti more than anything. In most organizations, Conti's quite the gang. It has everything from zero-day creators to infrastructure managers to brokers and almost a sales organization. It's pretty interesting, the ransomware as a service that Conti is doing right now. The Lockbit and Black Cat are very prevalent. And I've even seen quite a few Phoboses in the last 6 months. You can see the ones that have kind of broken through to be the new big players on the block. So responding to an incident, especially responding to a ransomware incident, and in my opinion, I think 90% of the work for response for a ransomware incident comes in the preparation. We see so many organizations like this chart here is just an illustration of that, 87% know that they have suffered an incident. It's quite interesting that every year it's becoming more urgent. It's actually 1 out of 5 respondents in this survey report having experienced crippling cybersecurity incident, and only 1/3 of the respondents, there was 600 and something respondents in this survey, only 1/3 of these respondents believed that they avoided a security failure in the last 18 months. And so all of us are in the business of cybersecurity, and we've probably all been in it for some time. And it's still a little bit chasing the tail. We're not getting ahead of these threat vectors and these threat actors, and they oftentimes are a step ahead of us. But I talked a little bit about preparing for an incident, and I put down some of my thoughts here about things that I see that are missing when we show up for ransomware. After the ransomware incident, you'll see a lot of suggestions in here about contracts and standards and policies. And I can tell you that after a ransomware incident, all of that happens. It's a shame that it doesn't happen before, but especially when it comes to negotiating contracts and understanding privilege. These are very important things that can save a lot of time during a ransomware incident. I see too many clients struggling with insurance companies, and too many clients that don't know who they're going to call when an incident happens. And so really getting these agreements in place now, understanding how it's going to work, usually through something like a tabletop exercise, is very beneficial for clients, so that we understand who we're going to call, when we're going to call them, how they're going to be able to help us, and what the limits of their help are going to be. One of the most important things, knowing where your capabilities stop and when you have to call somebody else. And I put tabletop exercises on its own line just because having a third party come in, conduct a tabletop exercise, and run both your technical team and your executive leadership team through their roles and responsibilities that are going to be required of them during a ransomware incident is much easier to do in a tabletop exercise than in real life. And so hopefully got some questions about this at the end about preparing. Obviously, when it comes to ransomware, backups are probably the biggest gap for most customers. And there's an old adage of a 3-2-1 rule for backups, where you have 3 copies of your backups. 2 of them are on different medium, and 1 of them is offline. And what I see happen to too many customers is that the backups are all online. And so I'm pulling a number out of my head, but it's probably pretty close, 65, 75% of the attacks I see, the first thing that the threat actor does after they get domain admin access is they go after the service accounts for Veeam or backup exec, these kind of things. They really target those right away, because one of the big keys in them being successful is to make sure that you don't have backups. And so Graham had mentioned that you definitely want to talk to somebody about immutable backups and about how to architect a backup infrastructure so that it's resilient to a ransomware attack. This is the difference between being down for a couple days, maybe. And I say that unfortunately it's longer than that. Most customers who get hit with this, even with restoration, typically weeks. I see customers down. And a really interesting what we've seen in the customers that do end up negotiating for a decryption key. Graham had mentioned how quickly the ransomware can encrypt data. It doesn't work the same way. And so a machine that took 30 minutes to encrypt can take days to decrypt. It's become, this is why the recovery is never as fast as we think it's going to be, and why oftentimes it takes weeks to get the business back to usual if you don't have backups to restore. If you have to restore from a decryption key provided from an attacker, it's going to take way longer than restoring for backups. Now, when it comes to managing incident, this is probably what I do for 90% of my customers. All my customers have smart teams and skilled teams that are good at what they do, but most of them are not in the business of going through an incident. So knowing who you're going to call, knowing how, if it's a third party, how they can help you through the incident, what they can do to help manage the incident. Number one is it needs to be very customized to your business and what matters most to you. Graham had mentioned the risk appetite. This is really important when it comes to having a third-party vendor. Make sure that if you do have a retainer, that you've talked to your incident response team, you know who's assigned to your team, you know who's on call. All these things are really important. And we've seen oftentimes the mobile and secondary phone numbers being the primary way we communicate for the first week or so after a ransomware incident. Office is down and chat is down and everything's down, email's down. And so the secondary phone numbers are very important to make sure you have everybody's mobile number and secondary numbers. Obviously, there's the immediate response and containment, making sure it doesn't spread. And so quite challenging, most organizations in their incident response plan, it says if they have ransomware, they're going to isolate the network. But when I go in and do tabletops, there's oftentimes not a really good plan of how to separate distinct business units or how to separate geographies. That's really important when it comes to the immediate response. You're going to, I guess the one good thing about ransomware is right away when you have it, because you're going to start seeing the pop-ups and data's encrypted and you get lots of user calls. But being able to stop that spread, being able to understand what accounts are being used and how it's spreading laterally through the network, usually that takes a third-party forensic or incident response team. And so making sure you know who you're going to call when the incident happens and that team is ready to respond is one of the most important things that you can do. And unfortunately, preparing for litigation. And so most of these incidents result in some sort of litigation, whether it's litigation between you and other third parties that you work with or litigation between you and your customers. Unfortunately, most of these incidents do result in lawsuits. And so making sure that you're prepared, ready, collecting evidence and documenting the correct way is a very important aspect to this. Do I have it on it? Privilege. And so privilege is quite the thing. I would say most of my incidents, I work through counsel. So I'm working with your third-party legal counsel on behalf of you. And the intent behind that is to maintain some kind of privilege. I'm definitely not a lawyer. Don't want to be a lawyer. I love what I do. But we're seeing more recently, especially over the last 12 months or 12 to 18 months, that what we think is appropriate for confidentiality and maintaining privilege, that it really isn't holding up in court. And so a lot of times all the emails and all the texts and everything when it comes to the lawsuits are essentially fair game. And so that's something you definitely want to talk with both your internal general counsels and your outside counsels of how we plan to maintain privilege and what steps we need to take in the beginning of an incident to make sure that the incident is covered and privileged. It'll be very important to you if litigation pops up. So after the incident, definitely need to understand what happened. I don't see enough customers do lessons learned. And so depending on the criticality of an incident is usually how I like to structure lessons learned. And so if we've had a critical incident within 24 hours after a critical incident, we should be having an after action review. So we can talk about what we did well and what we did wrong. And then for, high and medium and low incidents, an appropriate time frame, a week later, a few days later. With the critical incidents, it's really important to sit down. And as soon as the dust settles and everybody has some sleep to talk about what we learned and what we can do different. Root cause is often really hard in a ransomware, challenging, I should say, in a ransomware incident to tell a customer what happened. Because when I show up, essentially everything's encrypted. Your main priority as a business is getting back to business. And so there's oftentimes not an opportunity to collect all the evidence that we need to collect to understand actually how the incident happened. Did it happen through an RDP connection? Was it a piece of malware? Was it a phishing campaign that was successful? Very challenging to identify the root cause in a ransomware incident, but very important because if you don't identify the root cause, it's just going to happen again. Depending on how the backup architecture, how resilient the backup architecture was. I see a lot of money invested in backup architectures after a ransomware incident, and it's nothing that my clients don't already know about. It's things that are maybe on the roadmap to get improved or get enhanced, and the ransomware incident just moves that along a little faster. But I see quite a bit of effort and money expended after the fact, and it would seem obvious to me that it's more expensive to fix this after the fact than probably get in there and fix it and get an assessment of your infrastructure and start taking the right steps to make sure that we're ready. Communication is very important, right? Your email is probably going to be down in a ransomware incident. So how are you going to communicate with your customers, and how are you going to pay bills and pay your employees? All these things are come up during an incident. And we really like to see communication templates, if you will, sort of pre-positioned letters that have general information. And these letters should be for internal employees, or external vendors and customers. So if you haven't spent the time to at least think about how you might let your customers and vendors know that you've experienced a ransomware incident, or that there's some sort of technical issue. Again, before the crisis is definitely the time when you want to talk about this. And all of these things, Graham mentioned that there's, I wish there was one tool, because I would come up with it and I'd sell it to everybody, but there is no one tool. And even when it comes to incident response, there's no one piece of the incident response program that is most important. This is the Kodolsky security view of a mature incident response program. I think the most important part is at the bottom, the continuous improvement. But the overall incident response program should really have something that looks like these phases, from assessment and design and training of the team, to testing of the security controls and the detection capabilities that you have, to your capabilities to respond and remediate after an incident. Yeah, I mentioned it a couple of times that you think that you'd be able to get to the remediation and response and back to businesses as soon as you can, but in reality, most customers are down for at least a week, and the majority of them are probably down for weeks when they get hit with a really good incident. So knowing what your capabilities are to remediate and respond, and how quickly you can expect to do this and be back to business, is really important. If you take this framework and you blow it up a little bit more into kind of different areas that we think, the assessment, design, and training. So assessment, have I been breached? Maybe you haven't received an alert in your tools in the last month or so. And does that mean that everything's good, or does that mean that the tool is missing something? And so doing these assessments and going into the network and doing threat hunting and testing and detecting, all very important to a mature program, because there is no one piece of this that's going to kind of solve the problem for you. IR plans, policies, and playbooks, really important, something I spend a lot of time with clients. Most incidents where I go to the clients a couple days into the incident, and I ask them where they are in their incident response plan, and nobody's even opened it up yet. So I like to go in and help customers and take this incident response plan that's more of a framework of severity ratings and criticalities and high-level steps, and create playbooks that are very specific to actual attack vectors. So a playbook for ransomware. So these are the tools that we have for ransomware. These are the capabilities we have. These are the steps we're going to take, very specific to ransomware. And same thing for malware and phishing emails and denial of service attacks. Having a playbook that's specific to that threat vector is going to help your organization respond quicker. Obviously, it's hard to find good people right now, and I'm sure everybody's struggling with that, and with the challenges that we're having right now with employment and hiring skilled people. Really important that you get your team prepared, tabletop exercises, things of that nature. And the worst thing that I hate to see, and I see it too often, is that a security tool did alert, or it did detect the beginnings of an incident, and the response wasn't there, or there was nobody actually looking at the dashboard to see the alert, things like that. 24/7 monitoring is almost a must for all customers of critical security events like firewall, antivirus, endpoint detection and response tools. Having somebody monitor that 24/7 makes the difference in just shelfware and something that's actually valuable to your organization. And then finding the right partner, knowing who you're going to call, knowing that they're going to be available when you do call, and knowing that they have the skills that your team is going to need. All very important. Going and trying to find somebody to help you do incident response after the incident is, that's going to just delay everything days and days more with contracts and things like that. So make sure all that's set up before, that you know what skills you have, what skills that your third-party vendors can help you with, and most importantly, where any of those gaps are that you're going to need extra help. I already gave some of these examples, but if you look at the framework and the different sort of exercises or projects that you can take within each one of these different pillars of the framework. So the assessment, obviously your cyber risk profile, what's on the internet, what can any person go find, through readiness assessments and resiliency reviews and DR, BCP training and drills, that sort of thing, all the way through the design and training and testing. I think the testing is one of the most important pieces here. We mentioned about breach simulation, tabletop exercises, but the red team and purple teams are really good. And it's really beneficial for your team to have some insight into what a red team does, what a blue team does, and how they can work together for purple team exercises. I think I'll probably stop there. Hopefully we have a whole bunch of questions, but if you need to get a hold of anybody at Kudelski, here's where you can get a hold of us. Phone calls and emails to me are always free, and so feel free to phone call or email me anytime. Be glad to talk to you about security or about your incident response program.
Nice. All right. So thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Daryl, for that insightful information on, of course, managing the incident response. We're talking surviving social engineering and ransom attacks. And of course, it's always about being prepared, having that playbook to guide the organization if it does happen or does occur. So that being said, we're going to jump right into our last presenter for today, Mr. Anish Bechu of the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Response Team. He has a short presentation before we wrap up today's proceedings. Over to you, Anish.
Mr. Anish Bechu, Cybersecurity Analyst at Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. Mr. Bechu is an experienced cybersecurity professional attached to the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, or TTCSIRT, under the Ministry of National Security. His duties vary from incident response, vulnerability and threat monitoring, to cybersecurity assessments of government systems and infrastructure. Mr. Bechu graduated from St. John's University in New York with a BSc in Cybersecurity Systems and a Master's of Business Administration in Information Systems and Decision Science. He is also a member of the Cybersecurity Industry Advisory Board at St. John's for their BSc and MSc programs. Let us welcome Mr. Bechu.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, cool. Right, so I'm going to do this really quickly, right? Try to keep this as short as possible. And a lot has been said so far, so I'm going to try not to duplicate what has already been said. And we're going to look at things in the local context. All right, because I think this is where we'll see value for the local persons. So let's go. Right, so quickly going to touch on who the CSIRT is if you haven't heard about us before. All right, we're going to touch on the top threats to Trinidad and Tobago, right? Specifically what we've seen targeting Trinidad and Tobago organizations, the top attack vectors that those threat actors are using to attack us. We're going to look at some national statistics as it relates to those vectors, as well as ransomware and phishing. And last, we're going to touch on some of the latest advisories we've put out, and some things that you all probably should read from us when it comes to securing yourself and preparing for these threats, right? Right, so a little bit about the TTC cert. I know it's a very long name, right? So we're based out of the Ministry of National Security. We were born out of the National Cybersecurity Strategy of 2012. And these are some of our rules and responsibilities, right? So alerts and warnings, incident response, awareness building and training, security audits and assessments, business continuity. We've recently ventured into the space of secure architecture development and design, policy development, and the security assessments is also new. All right, so in rolling forward, these are some of our international partners. So when you contact us with an incident, we have a very vast network of people that we could tap into to potentially get assistance, right? We have, with our local partners, so the TTPS Cybercrime and Social Media Unit, iGov, and with CARICOM Impacts. And then with some of our foreign partners, the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office through their CSIRT Commonwealth initiative, and the Organization of American States through the CSIRT Americas initiative, right? So at any single point in time, if we need information or any one of these people need information from us, we're able to tap into this network very, very quickly and get solutions to your problems. Cool. So the top 5 threats that we see today as the national CSIRT, all right, is number 1 is malware. Ransomware is very, very number 1 threat that we see in terms of impact, right? Social engineering, including phishing, closely followed, malicious insiders, data leakage, and good old-fashioned hacking. All right. I don't know how many of you recognize the little picture down below. This one by Vanda de God. That's actually the ministry. That's how the Ministry of National Security's website looked back in 2019 for a few hours when it was defaced, by good old-fashioned hackers. Right. So the top attack vectors that we see malicious actors using against local organizations is the exploitation of vulnerable systems, system vulnerabilities, particularly firewall and those gateway devices, those edge devices, and your email systems. And we're going to get into that a little bit once time permits. And the next one is phishing with malicious attachments, trying to harvest your credentials, trying to get you to give up information about your organization that you really shouldn't be giving up. And well, the last one is compromised user credentials. And I have a very nice statistic on that one that we're going to come up to. All right. And I'm glad that Daryl mentioned the RDP and exposed remote desktop in his presentation, and I quickly put together this slide, right? Is because as it stands right now, I just checked like 10 minutes ago during Daryl's presentation, we have 163 directly exposed to the internet RDP devices in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, this is across our entire IP space. These are 163 different IP addresses belonging to possibly 163 different organizations that have decided that their best course of action is to expose their critical systems directly to the internet. And we try to work with organizations to get this fixed, but it's always an uphill battle. Going forward, all right, government email accounts that have been found in third-party breaches over the past, I think it's 10 years this metric is for, right? That is gov accounts plus usernames and passwords that have been found in these breaches, and it's over 2,600 instances. Right. Ransomware as it happens or as it pertains locally, these are some of the big ones that have happened, that we can confirm have happened, right? And the associated risk with them. So Doppel Palmer, Ravel, I think we all know that one without saying the name, right? Phobos Makeup and THT. It was so bad at a point in 2020 that ourselves as well as iGovTT had to put out a joint advisory for the entire government as to how we should protect ourselves. And I'm going to share that advisory with you all. It's at the link below, and then I'm going to share the newer one a little bit later down. So we're going to skip past a few of these slides because I want to be quick. I know we're short on time. And we're going to look at this one. All right. Everybody has nice fancy email servers. Some of you know 365, some of you local, some of you have your own Exchange, right? Microsoft had a vulnerability in Exchange, I think it was last year, that not many organizations patched. You know, we had 63 organizations affected, and 2 organizations actually led to compromise, one of which where ransomware was deployed, right? Because you didn't update your email server in time, so the threat actors got in, took over your network and deployed ransomware on your network. Right? I'm gonna skip that. Right. So the national advisories that, like, this is what I think you all should read from us, because it's very, very important. It gives a pretty decent picture of how the threat landscape looks overall. Right. The first one is you all might have recognized this one. This one came out directly from the Ministry of National Security. It's warning of an increased cyber activity in the region. And again, it goes into to highlight ransomware, phishing, malicious insiders as some of the top things that the region is facing right now, and specifically Trinidad and Tobago. And the second advisory is our joint cybersecurity advisory on ransomware that we sent out alongside the TTPS and iGov-TT. And what this advisory went into doing, it actually gave three things came out of this advisory. And the first one is a ransomware prevention guide. The second one is our ransomware response checklist. And the third thing that this advisory had attached to it is your emergency contacts in government, right? So how do you get in contact with the TTC cert? How do you get in contact with the TTPS Cybercrime and Social Media Unit? And in the case of your government entity, how to get in contact with the security section in iGov-TT, right? So I implore you guys to take a look at this this advisory, because it lays out a lot of good things for you. And you know, the reason why I'm not going into the technical details is because I think it's been very, very well covered in the previous presentations, right? So how the prevention guide basically broke us down is you know, be prepared, make sure you're taking your backups, you know, the 3-2-1 rule, all that fun stuff. Your ransomware infection vectors, so internet-facing vulnerable devices, patch your things, all right? Phishing, precursor malware that's already existing that attackers now exploit, third parties and managed service providers, because you know you're handing control of your security to somebody else who may not necessarily do the work that they're supposed to do, which we have seen many times in the local context, all right? And general best practice and hardening guidance, right? So with that being said, I would like to wrap up. I know I just want to keep this short because I know the timeline is, I know time has expired, right? So keep in contact with the TTC cert. This is my email address. You're always welcome. If you have any questions, hit me up right there. If you want to subscribe to our mailing list to get alerts, advisories, and warnings from the National CSIRT, you could go to that link there. I'm going to post the link in the chat right after this, and you can subscribe for alerts there. All right. So thank you very much for giving me a time this afternoon, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you, Anish. A very short, very informative session. And of course, we have some questions coming in. We do have some questions coming in for TTCert. Of course, these are, most of the participants are from Trinidad and Tobago. So of course, I expect that we would have some questions for TTCert.
We'll try my best.
Right. The first one, I have a long wish list for a cybersecurity resource to have a better insight to news, activities, capabilities, opportunities, and resources for IT cybersecurity professionals to turn to as it pertains to Trinidad and Tobago. T&T Computer Society is the closest yet furthest thing I am aware of, and that's only because a mentor of mine mentioned them many years ago when we were apparently at the, so is it, will or can the TTCert publish and maintain such a resource?
Right, so I could answer that question in two directions. So just a little bit of background. I'm also a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Computer Society, right? So representing here as well. By subscribing to our mailing list, you would be getting that feed of, okay, threats that are coming out locally, things that you should be looking at. Also, we put out tips as, things for career development and stuff like that. At one point, we did have a resource portal that we are currently rebuilding, right? And the way that resource portal will be pushed back out to the public is through that mailing list. So I would recommend is to sign up there and be on the lookout. You basically read everything that comes out there, because it's all important in some way, shape, or form for development in the industry.
All right, so we have a second question again coming in for TTCert. Trinidad and Tobago has in recent years pushed forward in digitization for the public services. While a welcome move, does TNT have an active security in place and a proper DR plan for our national IT infrastructure to not suffer an outcome as severe as Costa Rica?
Okay, so great question. It's almost a stumping question, but I will answer it, right? The Ministry of National Security, along with our government partners, recently completed a National Cybersecurity Risk Assessment, or a National Cyber Risk, what we call our NCRA, right? This is where we looked at critical systems across Trinidad and Tobago, public sector and private sector, to get a gauge of where we're at and what we're missing, and what is going to take to get us where we're at, right? So we are in the process now of putting together these various pieces of policy and legislation and thing to get us to that point. This is, in conjunction with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, in conjunction with iGovTT, and trying to get us to a point where we could say that we have national policies. To some extent, we have got policies, right? But the only thing national right now is the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which we're working to update hopefully by the end of the year to put out a new version. And yeah, that's kind of where we're going with that right now.
Okay, good. Hopefully that answers the question that was raised. I don't have any questions coming in for Daryl or Graham. So now is your chance if you do have any questions. If not, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our participants who joined our webinar today on shaping the future of cybersecurity. I'm sure based on all the presentations today, you would have some takeaways. Of course, the main message is creating awareness across for all organizations, of course, creating a culture and changing the culture within the organization to build up resilience to all threats within your organizations. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns or just want to have a conversation, you can reach out to us, Precision Cyber Technologies and Digital Solutions. You can find us at www.precisioncyber.com or info@precisioncyber.com. Send us a message and we will surely get back to you. I would also like to take this time to thank all of our presenters for today, this morning session, midday session, and of course, Daryl and Graham, who's here this afternoon, as well as Anish, who's here with us this afternoon. Some very well put together, and if you realize that all of the presentations speak to that awareness and building a change in the culture to create policies and being prepared and resilient to these cybersecurity threats. So without further ado, I'd like to thank each of you, all of the participants again for joining us. And of course, we do have your contact information, and we're sure to share today's recording as well as further webinars that we are going to host in the near future. So do enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us again today. It was a pleasure.